Welcome to Watcher DM. I'm Gabriel, and today I am going to be doing a flip through and review of His Majesty the Worm. And really, I guess I should say I'm going to be trying to do a flip through and review of His Majesty the Worm because she thick, boys. I do not know if I will be able to flip through all near 400 pages of this before my battery runs out or my SD card fills up. Let's dig in so we can get through as much of it as possible. First and foremost, I think it's worth noting that the end papers here are used to kind of give you a brief, useful overview of some of the things that are some of the processes of this game. But it is a procedure-heavy game. And so having access to these is not necessarily going to fill your cup in terms of understanding the rules or necessarily being able to use them at the table. In fact, I have used these end papers 0 times during play. That's not to say that they're not useful, and I think for the right person they are. For me, they were not. The character sheet is also rendered here in the back. And the back side of the character sheet, the cheat sheet, is maybe the most useful piece of text in the entire document, while still falling, in my opinion, pretty short of what would be needed to really play the game. And we'll get into why that is as we go through the book. But I'm going to try and keep it kind of punchy and get moving. Now, the writing for this book was by Josh McCrowell. Graphic design by Pete Borlas and Michael Strange. Editing by Melody Watson, Kennedy Gerber. Copy editing by M. Finch and Izzy Peters. I think that must be Matt. Is that Matt Finch? Cover design by Peter Borlas and Navi Drake. Additional editing by Tiger Wizard, Tiggy Wizzy, my boy. And then character sheet by Matt Finch, or M. Finch, Pete Borlas, Michael Strange, and cartography by Dyson Logos, and we'll see that later. The Dicier font, Speak the Sky, Hangover Table, and Other Tomfoolery by Chris Sanford, and the alchemical icons by Martin Nerurkar. I am sorry I butchered your name, my friend. There's also a whole bunch of art listing here for different art credits and playtesting credits. And there's also some public domain artwork. And probably the most novel bit about this is the license. Permission is granted to photocopy or otherwise produce this. If your product declares compatibility, you have to do this. But there is a section in here that basically says you can use the rules without limitation. And so that is where the Gloam comes from, which is another game that I recently played. And was kind of the inspiration for me wanting to do a flip-through review of this book. Despite wanting to do it beforehand, but I've been terrified because I don't know how long this video is going to be. So, your chapters. You've got the basics, the adventurer, the guild, kith and kin, the 4-part paths, the crawl phase, the challenge phase, the camp phase, and the city phase. Then the worm turns, so this is game mastering, and then you get appendices after that. So sorcery, alchemy, dungeon denizens, city creation, and underworld creation. Now, from this vantage, I am going to say this book looks extremely well organized. What an elegant solution you have to the problem of play. In practice, I find this book virtually unusable at the table. It is really challenging. And it might just be a me thing. So I'm not, I think it is obvious to anyone with eyes that this is a book made with a ton of love and an enormous amount of effort. But boy, howdy, do I find this just really hard to use at the table. I have turned largely to using the PDF on my phone to be able to find the things I'm looking for when I need them, because otherwise the way it's organized just really clashes with my brain. The introduction is going to cover the basic stuff, so it uses Tarot for resolution, which is the novel mechanic, if I'm being totally honest. The way that the Tarot deck works in this game, I'll just explain it briefly, because I think it's brief and worth explaining in brief, which isn't done up here, I think, at all. Like, even in the basics, I think there's, like, it discusses the phases here, and then it discusses all this, but, like, you actually don't get to talking about tests of fate until page 8. And this is kind of the mechanic of the book, or this is like the mechanic of the game. You divide the deck into major and minor arcana. The minor arcana also gets the Fool. The minor arcana deck with the Fool is the player deck. And the major arcana deck is the GM deck. When you are testing fate, you are drawing a card from the minor arcana deck or the player deck, and you are adding the stat for the test. So it'll be a number between 1 and 4, and it'll be correlated to one of the suits, and we'll get into what that means, but swords, cups, wands, coins. Not too complicated. You're trying to hit a number of 14 or higher. If you do so on the first pull, that's a success. If you do so with the same suit you are testing on the first pull, that is a great success. If you do not achieve it on the first pull, you can push fate, which means you draw a second card. If that also does not achieve 14, you've added 2 cards now plus your stat. If you have not hit 14, that is a great failure. And if you do achieve success, that's just a normal success. So that's how the game is designed. It is definitely designed to encourage pushing fate. And pushing fate with the Fool. The Fool is kind of a weird card. The Fool is just kind of a weird card because it causes you to reset all of the decks, right? It's worth noting here that, like, you've only got so many, there's only so many cards in the pile. So, like, until you do a reset via a reshuffle, there is a limited number of potential wins and failures within the deck, and the whole group is going to be pulling from it. So it really does have an impact how many players you have at the table. Favor and disfavor is a relatively trivial concept that is, in my opinion, kind of over-explained here. But you can apply... favor and disfavor is just like a +3. And then you can apply relevant motifs. You can gain favor by applying a motif to an action. Resolve. I think you can spend resolve prior to a test of fate in order to gain favor. And then aiding others, you can basically use a card or apply favor. And I'll talk about the challenge phase because it actually changes a lot of these rules. But aiding others is something you can do in a regular test of fate to give someone favor. There's examples here. They're not terrible. They're just also not super, super useful. Bound by fate. Like, you cannot retry the same test unless the circumstance significantly changes. So, this is just... Everybody's kind of bound by fate. Once you've resolved something, you don't get to try again. This seems like a lot of text to say that, but we are where we are. Group tests are described here. I have not used these, so I'm not going to speak to them. But I think it's basically like a skill challenge, right? It's like 2 hits, 1 hit, 0 hits, less than 0 hits. And then effects. So these are the different effects that can happen to characters and objects. I guess we've used these, but they're not something that we spend a lot of time with. And then we start talking about the adventurer. So just to kind of start off with, like, this is the basics. This is kind of the rules, right? From page 1 to page 13 here. There's 12 pages of rules here. They could have been less pages, I think. And they could have been structured better for, like, reference, I think. For me, I found this section of the book, I still find it very, very challenging to use. Despite its brevity. It's like only 12 pages, right? Okay, so let's talk about the adventurer. This is your nerd you're going to make. They're pretty great. the player's manifesto is a lot of stuff about engaging with the world and how to be a good player, etc., etc. That's all great to have. You're going to talk about session 0, which is critical, I think. So it's good to have. It's taking up a reasonable amount of space here, but like it's important. There's going to be collaborative adventure creation, collaborative guild creation, and collaborative game creation covered in all 3 sections. It's important to acknowledge here that this, by design, is preventing a certain style of play. There is not really any room here for an open table style of play, or for having PCs kind of, join and leave your campaign, which is something that I have frequently because of the number of games that I run. I keep a pretty tight schedule of gaming, and it is not always the case that my players can attend every session, and it isn't always the case that the sessions are not being attended by new players who are jumping in for a single session or for, a couple of sessions. So because of the rigid structure of this game, it definitely feels like it doesn't want you to bend those rules. That said, I've bent them. It's fine. Go nuts. There's nothing about this that isn't also yours. So you can make the changes you need to make it work. Okay, here we go. Call to adventure. This is my favorite part of the whole game so far, is creating your character. Unfortunately, because this is designed to do with a group, and if you don't do it with a group, you are missing out on some of the value here, some of the juice, and I think that's unfortunate. But that said, I think it is still probably one of the best parts of the game. You start by rolling an origin, and by rolling, I mean, of course, you pick your kith and kin from chapter 4. When your kin talent starts as mastered, you choose a path. So this is your one of your suits. Swords would be like a warrior type person. Coins would be like a thief or bard type person. Cups would be like a cleric type person, and wands would be like a wizard type person. And of course, variations all within that. And don't lean on that, because the motifs are actually describing who your character is, and I think that's the more important calculus here. But basically, you set one of your path talents to be mastered, and the rest of them are in training. You pick a name, and you get your 4 resolve. Then it's about fitting in. So your next step is you pick your weakest, whatever your weakest stat is going to be, and you tell a story about your character being challenged by something as a youth. And, what was the thing that kind of held them back as a youth? And then based on that story, you pick a motif. Motifs are described on page 24. And so page 24, you've got your motifs. It's fine to pick from these lists. I think that works really, really well. When trying to come up with motifs on my own, I actually found it extremely difficult to get people to pin down their characters and motifs. Because we do not think of ourselves in motifs. I do not think of myself as a nasty jester, despite that being an awesome evocative description of me. So, yeah, just a thing worth noting here. You might just want to hand them the descriptors and professions and say, pick from the list, or draw a card. It's fine. Your failed career gives you your second lowest stat and another motif. And of course, with each of these, you're telling a story to the party or to the table about what that failed career was. And then your querent, as adventure calls to you, tell a story about why you're willing to brave the underworld. What is your quest? Note it down. And you pick a couple challenges. And then full-blown weirdo, you set out to become the dreadful, ugly, and unwelcome thing, an adventurer. Your first foray into the underworld was what? Tell a story about your adventure into the underworld. Based on your story, put a 3 in the last attribute. Choose a motif based on this adventure. This is your last motif, so think carefully. What does your character look like? Briefly describe them, and to the rest of the guild. Now, this part's weird because it kind of says, well, you've already been down in the dungeon at some point. Tell us what you did down there, which is very strange, given that contextually you're going to be discovering the dungeon. But also there's a caveat to that, and we'll get to that. Guild bonding is the next step. This is where your guild all decides what they're doing together. So you're going to set up the contract, basically the charter for your guild, how much treasure everyone gets, etc. This is painful if you don't have the whole group together. It doesn't make any sense if you're trying to establish the things later. And honestly, I don't actually know how important it is. it feels like it's too much structure for the type of games that I tend to run. So we did use it because I'm trying to play the game by the book, but I did find it a little outside of what I needed. Treats from Mama is good. Actually, I really, really like the way that they do inventory in this game. And so I think this might be one of the standout features. There's luxury items, common items, and impoverished items. And you get one luxury item, you get 5 common items, and as many impoverished items as you want to start with. Your bags and your belt kind of fill up with all of them. And then basically every time you're back in town, if you spend money, you buy into a slot. So you either buy into luxury, which you've spent a lot of money to buy into, at which point you can pull items from all 3 categories, as many as you want until your bags are full. And the next slot down is common items, and so on. So if you're just need impoverished items, you can, spend 25 gold or whatever and get as many impoverished items as you want. It's pretty cool. It's a clever mechanic. And then, you get a summary here. Here's your adventurer sheet. But kind of just describing. Yeah, this might be a little overkill for me. It's not. I get it. It's like trying to do what Mothership, I think, does, but it's doing it in a really weird way. It's just taking a lot of space and requiring a lot of reading. It's fine. Here's your, name, kith, and kin, attributes, quests, motifs. The quests is a thing. That's one of the things you pick, I think, in Full Blown Weirdo. Oh, maybe not. Yeah, I think the quest is something you pick, maybe even earlier. But your quest is like your thing that you're looking for, and you're going to need it because it's how you get XP. Is when the group takes on... we'll get to XP later. Motifs, you pick out your motifs. Bonds, this is another important characteristic. You need bonds between the different characters. You charge them by role-playing, like by playing into them really well, or by whatever the mechanic is. So if you choose an ally, you charge a bond when you make an ally laugh, both in and out of character. Each one of these kind of has that stuff. You can make up your own bonds, but they're pretty annoying to come up with a mechanical component like this. So I would actually just try and find how your bond that you're coming up with fits into one of these models here. Also, it is extremely difficult to remember that these are the triggers you're supposed to be looking out for. As a GM, I would turn this to your players and say, you need to keep track of your bonds here and look for ways to charge them, because it's only through charging bonds that you're able to heal during the camping phase. It's also used for some other things, but that's how it works. Arete? Yeah, okay, arete. It actually says here how to pronounce it. This is like how you level up your kith and kin. So when you achieve the 3 things that are important to your kith and kin, you get a new talent for your race or your origin. These are the languages which we did not use. You've got your conditions here that are listed. Now, the way that conditions work, like stressed, staggered, wounded, injured, and death's door, these are how your wounds work outside of talents and armor. So when you take a wound, you can apply it to a piece of armor or to a talent. Only one talent can be wounded. And then you start applying them to your statuses. So staggered, then injured, then death's door. If you're on death's door, you're basically dying. And with there's this process for that. Resolve is a thing you use, again, for gaining favor, or you can use it to cast spells. Lore is something that you can also use. This is actually probably one of my favorite mechanisms as well in this game. Lore allows you to bid lore. So if your character would know something, you say, because of this motif, I want to know how much I know about this thing. You ask a question. And then the GM, based on the lore bid, basically just answers the question. If the GM feels like you've got the knowledge because of your motif and whatever, then you can do this. Now, there are some other actions in the game that you can take, like the read a book action in the camp actions, that lets you basically take the contents of a book, read it, and now you can bid lore against the contents of that book. in addition to just your motifs. So lore bidding is a really interesting way of doing information dissemination. Yeah, I think it's pretty good. And then you've got your talents here. So talents are a little bit interesting in that you, for your in-training talents, you can use your master talent anytime you want. In-training talents, you have to use experience points to use. And when you use experience points to use a talent, it goes into that talent. And when you get to 7 spent XP to use a talent, the talent becomes mastered. So by using your talents, this is how you level up. Really interesting mechanic. But because of the way that this works, you can technically use all of your talents out of the box as long as you have the XP to use them. So it's an interesting way of presenting it as like a really, it's a resource you can use. XP is accumulated. If everyone agrees to help you on your quest, every player, including you, gets 3 XP. So this is how you get XP as a guild. When the guild completes a quest, everyone gets 3 XP. You can also get XP from contracts. And then there's also the carousing city action, which you can use to spend money, but gain XP and maybe have a hangover. The concept here is that adventurers in His Majesty the Worm grow wide, not deep. That is, XP allows you to use and master more talents, broadening the options available to you. You do not gain bigger numbers, more hit points, etc. So it's clever design in that regard. I think it's well done. Animal companions and familiars. Boy howdy. We've wanted to use it. I've not used it. It's kind of complicated, and I just don't really have the bandwidth for it. And I'll get to why. Pack space and gear. Again, one of my favorite characteristics of this game is the pack space and gear system. That said, it is also tricky to get PCs to fill up their inventory, which is something they should be doing in this game. They should be filling up their entire inventory. You cannot become encumbered, so there isn't any incentive to not fill up your inventory, and all of the items are free. Like once you're bought in, you can just load up. So you should. Pack space and gear is there. Retirement, new adventurer checklist. So yeah, you got your setup there, and then we talk about the guild. Now I'm going to breeze through this bit. Guild name, sigil, terms. We did not draw a sigil. I think we need to. Marching order and your role in the guild. Again, I think we did not really tackle this very much. Current contracts. We have done a contract. Noteworthy deeds and fame. Nothing too important there. Kith and kin. This is where you're going to find out about your different origin options. Humans. I think we just got our first human. The humans come from different houses. They are weird. They're very weird, actually. But they're really cool, too. Although I will say, content warning for this game. There is a lot of cannibalism in this game. So you should just, if that's an issue for you, figure something out. Maybe play a different game or find a way to paint that over with some other context. The Fae here are broken down into high elves, wood elves, dark elves, and gnomes. And yeah, each kith and kin has its own talent that it gets. Underfolk break down into dwarves, halflings, and trolls. And then orcs are broken up into different bloodlines. And so they're kind of like their elemental bloodlines. So earth-blooded, sea-blooded, storm-blooded, and fire-blooded are the different orcs. And we also recently had one of our first orcs in the party join. And then we go into the 4 paths. These are the paths I told you about based on the different suits. So you've got swords and your different sword talents, pentacles, your different pentacle talents, cups, and your different cups talents, and path of wands, and the different wand talents. The wand talents are by far the weirdest because they then talk about this whole... Actually, you know what? I'm going to take that back. Cups is weird because it gets the alchemy talent, which has its own chapter. Wands is weird because it gets gramarye and basically the pacts. If you make a pact... these pacts here are ways that you can get these spells, I think. Yeah. Actually, I'm going to be honest. We have a magic user. He has not cast any spells from anything because we find the magic system kind of hard to use. And we haven't really had the time to like dive into it. I think we're after a dive, it'd probably be pretty cool. But I plan on bringing some spellcasters to bear on the PCs in the next session. So we'll see how it goes. Now, this is where the game kind of goes, for me, a little too far into the weeds, the phases. So this game is very procedural, and it's broken into 4 different phase types. The crawl phase is just exploration. This is you running around and discovering stuff in the dungeon. You're going to be hitting traps and locked doors and secret doors, etc., etc. The meat grinder is a series of, it's a table of card entries from all the major arcana, and each one represents one of these different things. So you've got curiosities, travel events, random encounters, and quest rumors. And then for that section, right, you're going to have a table kind of like this. For that section of dungeon, you're going to have this table, and as you're playing and pulling these cards and these effects are happening, you're going to scratch out the entry in your table and repopulate it with a different entry after each session. That's actually quite a load of work to do for a GM trying to prep things, to come up with new and interesting curiosities and stuff. Some GMs find it very enjoyable. I think, this game for them is like probably their game. Like, this is the game that they're running. For me, a GM who is running a lot of games, this is kind of a lot of work. And so I've been struggling to get it right. It talks about some of the other mechanics here. Of course, it uses clocks, because why wouldn't it? And then this is another component I basically have not used, is social encounters and disposition. And then, you've got some example afflictions, which is pretty cool. Dispositions and stuff, again, I have not really mucked with any of that. I've just been playing the characters as characters and, letting it be what it is. And then you get an example crawl phase, and then we go into the challenge phase. So the challenge phase, this is when you get into a combat or some scenario that's going to have a combat going on. The challenge with this, I find, is zones are defined here as important, but there isn't really any guidance on setting up like the scene ahead of time. So you kind of have to, you either have to have this planned out, like the encounter is going to happen, or you have to have it planned out like how you're going to handle a scene based on where they are in the dungeon. And we'll get into building the Underworld later. I think this is a totally achievable thing, but it's kind of thrown in here like, oh, this is just how it's done. And like, this is kind of not how it's done. Like, it's kind of challenging to come up with interesting zones for a combat, without some forethought. So it is a little tricky, but it is important to some of the different moves. Ambushes and surprise are discussed here, special rules, and an example scene. So that's setting the scene. And then you draw your challenge cards. Everybody draws 4 cards, except for the GM, who draws a number of cards based on certain monster characteristics. And then the challenge cards are spent on initiative, on actions, and then on minor actions. So playing initiative, you play a card face down. That card is simultaneously how soon you're going to go in the turn, from bottom to up. So it'll be from 1 up to, well, I guess technically full. You could have a 0. So from 0 up to 14. And then it is also your armor class, if you will. It's how hard you are to hit with different effects. So the sooner you go, the easier of a target you are. Tied initiatives act at the same time. And then you take your turn. And so the GM counts up from the lowest card to the highest card. And then on your turn, you can take an action. Actions are broken up across suits. And again, this is one of those cases where it says kind of what they are here, but it doesn't deep dive until later. So you're just getting kind of a brief overview. And then it tells you like to turn to page 116 to get the rest of the information, which is fine. But like this is kind of a lot here. Now, the big gripe I have with this game actually is that to use any of the actions in one of these suits, you have to have a card of that suit. So you might have a warrior in your party who is like, does a lot of damage and is ready to kind of dish it out, but does not draw any swords during their action phase, and so basically cannot attack. That sucks. It really feels bad for them to have to do this other stuff. Not to say that there's not some cleverness there, and like we've worked around it, but it's definitely pretty challenging. Yeah, let me just double check here. Yeah. Yep. Face down cards. So usually play challenge cards face up. Some actions do face down. So aid another or dodge, for instance, which get revealed later. And then interrupt actions can sometimes be played. So there's some actions that are interrupts. The Fool is, I think it's not played like other challenge cards. It has a value of 0. And when you play the Fool, you get an additional turn. So that's kind of weird. And then you do not have to take an action on your turn. If you do not take an action, the GM continues counting. Nobody takes minor actions. Similarly, if you have no cards in your hand, so then the minor actions are the same thing as actions, but you don't get the bonus from your stat, which is a little weird, but it's fine. And then you get the end of round. So that's the procedure for the challenge phase. And then you've got your actual actions. Obviously, the sword actions are your attack and riposte. Pentacle actions, avoid, dash, dodge, and roughhouse. This is like your grapples and stuff. And then your cup actions is aid another, command, pull an item from the pack, and use an item. And then your wand actions are going to be banter, speak incantation, and recover. Recover is important for removing effects. It's kind of one of those things that's like, it's stated. I think it's pretty well stated, actually. But it's really hard to remember, like, oh, you've got an effect on you. Oh, and I need to use the recover action to recover from it. This is something I would want to spend more time kind of becoming better at using. It is good. It's just kind of hard to understand. Or hard to remember. The morale bit here is interesting, but I have not used it. Miscellaneous actions. These are actions that can be used with any card type, so any suit. Including move, guard, bid lore, pull an item from belt, reload crossbow, test fate. So this is just like, I want to do something that's like, I want to hold a door closed or leap a chasm. Like, you would test your fate like you normally would in the regular game. And then trivial actions is a catch-all. And then vigilance is you're watching for a specific thing to occur, a trigger, and then you take an action. But it requires a card to do vigilance. So it's kind of like holding your action. You use a card to hold your action. And then GMing the challenge. Again, a whole second section just on how to do this challenge phase as the GM, because the enemies have a different card pull and different things that are going on. So they have lesser dooms and greater dooms that they're acting on, and they get minor actions as well. There's retreating, wounds, notching armor. This is what I was talking about earlier, where when you take a wound, you notch your armor. Piercing and critical damage, I have not used yet, but probably should. Health and defense, tracking enemy damage. We'll get to that a little bit later when we get to the monster stat blocks. This video is already 30 minutes long, and we're not even halfway through. We're going to go a little faster. Death Store, you're almost dying. New adventurers, how to make a quick adventurer. Not very practical, but fine. Example challenge phase, great. It's long because challenge phases are kind of complicated. The camp phase is something we've done repeatedly. It's kind of cool. You can use fellowship to roleplay to regain some, build up some bonds. You can fletch arrows. You can hunt. You can patrol. You read a book. This is cool. It gives the GM disadvantage on the encounter check, which is kind of neat. Rest and recover allows you to recover from your sicknesses, and then scouting ahead allows you to get some information. And then breaking bread. Oh, right. Also, there's training, updating maps, using an item, and using a talent. Breaking this across this page actually has been really confusing because these almost never get looked at. This page is intended to help with that, but it's weird that it's in the middle. Whatever. Breaking bread, you consume a ration. and if you can't consume a ration, you become stressed. And then no rest for the wicked. This is the encounter check, and then recovery. So if you're not stressed, you can recover from wounds at the end, based on the number of bonds you have, I believe. And then end of camp phase, that's about it. Overland travel is an optional rule that we have largely not used because we're playing it by the book, and the book doesn't really provide an overland travel place. I'll get to what that means in a bit, but the city phase here, this is another phase we have barely used, but basically if you're in the city, you've got your own kind of meat grinder style encounter thing, and then you've got this is how you do your upkeep, so this thing I was talking about with buying items. These are the city actions you can take when you get back to the city. And so it's kind of trying to provide a similar type of structured engagement with the city. I find this to be pretty overdone. Like, this isn't something I necessarily feel like makes a lot of sense for my games. I think it's probably useful to some. Like, there's some world where this is, like, maybe the cooler game for some people. But it's not. It just hasn't hit for me yet. I have not spent enough time in the city phase to make it make a lot of sense for me. The Omphalic Market is how you buy your equipment. The item descriptions are very sensible. It makes them pretty usable. The art in here is obviously top notch. Like, I guess I haven't said it, but all the art in here is pretty top notch. You got your weapons and your example city phase. I do like how they kind of bookend each section with an example of how to use that section. Then we get to game mastering. So the game mastering section, you've got your manifesto, similar to the PC manifesto, how to run the crawl phase, creating your underworld, creating a soundscape. It encourages you to create a soundscape. Again, this game is kind of asking the GM to do a lot. So it's cool. Like, if this is your game and you want to run this game and this is the game you're going to run, like, you're the right GM for this. If you're running a lot of different games, or you've got, ADHD and you want to be touching everything, I think this game is probably more something you want to pull ideas from and less focus on being strictly adherent to the rules as presented, because they are pretty intense. You've got creating interesting characters. So I think this is just good guidance. The Blessing of Chaos. What are you holding? How much treasure? What can I see? What do I know? Yeah. Running the challenge phase. This is just about running a challenge phase. I think I've already talked about that. Creating interesting antagonists, creating surprises, running the camp phase, so different campfire discussions. This section I actually need to bring out next time we have a camp phase, because I haven't yet, and it's obviously important. And then running the city phase, again, I have not used this at all. Converting other games. This is useful if you're converting other games. I was trying to use the game as is presented, and so I'll talk about what that means. And then you've got some inspiration material here, movies, books, blogs, and then we get into sorcery. I'm going to blaze through sorcery because we have not used it. The spell ideas here are super cool. They're super weird. The maledictions are funky and freaky, and it all looks super dope, and I hope we get to use it someday. But it is kind of a lot. Spells of the Welkin. Yeah, these are all pretty dope. Alchemy is another system that we've kind of dabbled in, but is largely, it's kind of hand wavy. Basically, it's like, yeah, you can make stuff out of these different creature bits. And here's some examples. But it's not going to be a complete list of all the things you could make, because it doesn't have a complete list of all the monsters that could be in here. So I think it does actually cover all of the monsters that are presented in the book itself. With possible exception of, I think the Wraith isn't in here. Yeah, I think the Wraith and the Skeleton literally just aren't in here at all. Which, whatever. Monster Mixology. Cocktail Codex makes the bold claim that there are only 6 cocktails. I don't know what this is. Okay. Creature stats. So this is how stats work for making a creature. These are the creature actions, which, man, this really, I wish this had been earlier in the book. It's fine. And then you've got your creature themes. So these are like the templates for like the different creature types: undead, spirits, man, sorceress, etc. And then you've got kind of the tier of creature, so minion, brute, strategist, elite, and dungeon lord. And then you've got a bestiary. Now this is the actual monsters that come with the game. So you've got everything from animate statue, bloody bones, brain spider, cockatrice, gluttony devil, dragons in here, a face rat, a fungoid, a griffin, a harpy, imp, a djinn, kelpie, lich, the yellow king, and then you got a lion, a mimic, a nymph, an ogre, questing beast, skeleton, slime, the spore hulk titan, which is a big dungeon lord monster, an ungoat, a vampire, a wraith, a winter wolf, and a zombie. And that's your bestiary. And then you get into probably the juiciest bits of this book, which is city creation. And this gets you to making a city by laying out a spread, a sprawl as it's described. And each of these places is a place. And they actually do a really good job here of kind of breaking down. So every city has the Grey, the Ossuary, and the Omphalic Market. And then you can make the map from the cards as they're laid out. And then each of those kind of regions is going to get one of these cards. And so they're all over the place. Like there's the Vinegar District, the Hangman's Hill, the Grey Docks. Right, you're just going to have all these different places. The Brothel of Battle, Court of Swords. And so you'll end up with a totally different city based on what you play, which is great. This was a lot of fun to design. Unfortunately, designing the city has meant that we have not ultimately actually played very much in the city. So it's just not a place we've spent a ton of time. I know we have a Sidereal house. These places are all pretty cool. And then Underworld creation, I'm going to say largely the same thing. So the origins of the Underworld are mythic. The Underworld is a set of cards. It talks about writing room descriptions and stuff. And then you're going to get to the meat grinder bit, how to create that. And then you've got dungeon seeds. Now, this is interesting stuff. These maps are by Dice and Logos. They're really quite good. I got a pretty weird... I got the City of Ruin as the first entry point to the dungeon. And then we got Shania as the second place in the dungeon, which is parallel to the Menagerie of Singular Creatures. And both of those are just above the Hellmarked. And that's my whole dungeon. And so the rest of these, they're kind of the same structure. It's a sights, sounds, smells, and tastes, lighting structures, common monsters, and Dungeon Lord. But the Dungeon Lord doesn't point to an actual creature in the book. You're expected to make up the Dungeon Lord based on just the pastiche that is given here and the description here. There's some cool ideas here, but these are dungeon seeds, like ungerminated seeds. And then it talks about creating interesting rooms. You've got a little list of 21 interesting room concepts here, which is great. Creating interesting traps. You get another 20, or is it like 10? I guess it's just 9 traps to do things with. It talks about building a tutorial dungeon, writing a meat grinder table, and then it provides the Tomb of Golden Ghosts as an adventure site that you can play right out the gate out of the book, which I have not run yet. It'll be the next thing that I run after I finish with my current campaign. Holy smokes, we got it done in less than 45 minutes. Thank you so much for hanging out. If you like these videos, I hope you'll hit the like button. If you would like to see more of them, you should hit the subscribe button. If you want to be notified, hit the bell icon. And if you want to get these videos a week early, you can go to my Patreon at patreon.com/watcherdm and join for like $2 a month. You can get early access to these weekly videos. That's 8 videos a month. And you can be the coolest kid on the block, knowing ahead of time what stuff I'm going to talk about. Thanks for watching, folks. See you next week.